All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're looking at a truly fascinating phenomenon: how a developing nation in Southeast Asia managed to become this massive, unstoppable producer of global boxing talent. I mean, the Philippines has produced dozens of world professional boxing champions. So, how does that happen? Well, we're going to explore how extreme adversity, deeply rooted cultural beliefs, and a highly unique form of intelligence forged some of the absolute most resilient athletes on the entire planet. Okay, let's dive into this quote, because sports psychologist Lee Tajnera perfectly hits the nail on the head here. He worked really closely with the Philippine national boxing team, and he realized something huge. For these athletes, boxing isn't just a passionate hobby. It's definitely not some after-school extracurricular activity. It's a literal life-or-death fight to escape poverty. They endure one of the most punishing sports in the world simply because it puts food on the table for their families. They are, quite literally, those cornered tigers Tajnera is talking about. Section 1. The fight for survival. To really understand the Filipino boxer, you've got to look at their demographic reality. Over a decade of observation, researchers noted a pretty stark fact. Not a single amateur Filipino boxer they looked at was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Not one. They all come from incredibly modest, humble beginnings. So, when they step into that ring, there's no safety net, there's no educational fallback waiting for them. They willingly subject their bodies to this uncompromising sport for one primary reason, and that is to support their families and fundamentally alter their quality of life. Actually, some even drop out of high school just to focus entirely on honing their fighting skills. Because when winning a medal means a financial reward that can change a family's trajectory forever, that motivation goes way, way beyond just wanting a shiny trophy. Section 2. Faith, fate, and culture. So you really can't separate these boxers from their cultural context. With roughly 85% of Filipinos identifying as Roman Catholic, these athletes are deeply, deeply spiritual, and they bring those beliefs straight into the locker room with them. Now, sociologists can give you a whole list of reasons why athletes pray in general, but for the Filipino boxer, psychologists observed something specific. It acts as an immediate, highly effective coping strategy. Before that bell rings, they aren't usually sitting there using complex, Western psychological centering techniques to calm down. No, they're using prayer as this natural, ingrained form of meditation that keeps them grounded and focused under unbelievable stress. Culturally, there's also this incredibly strong belief in fate, which brings us to the concept of suerte, or basically luck. When a Filipino boxer wins a massive career-defining fight, you'll often hear them attribute the win to luck or to God's will. Now, why would they do that after training so hard? Well, it's because the culture highly values humility and modesty. Claiming a win was purely due to their own personal greatness, that would be seen as pretty arrogant. So attributing the win to suerte allows the athlete to accept the victory while staying perfectly aligned with the cultural values of their elders. It's a real balancing act. But on the flip side of that is malus, which translates to being jinxed. Now, in traditional Western sports psychology, an external locus of control, blaming a loss on something outside of yourself, that's usually heavily discouraged. But in this context, malus actually acts as a vital psychological defense mechanism. Think about it. If a boxer faces a devastating defeat, claiming they were jinxed softens that immense psychological blow. And crucially, it's a sentiment the community culturally understands and accepts without judgment, which allows the athlete to actually process the loss and move forward. Section 3. The rise of Pacquiao. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it maps out the ultimate case study of this entire environment. We're talking about the jewel in the crown of Philippine boxing, Manny Pacquiao. His trajectory against truly enormous odds is just astonishing. In the 6th grade, his parents separate, and he's forced to drop out of school. He actually describes his childhood self as a one-man traveling grocery store, literally selling bread and water on the streets just to survive. By age 14, he stows away on a boat to Manila just for a shot at boxing. At 16, he turns pro, weighing a mere 98 pounds, which is well below the minimum weight class, by the way. And from those beginnings, he rises to become an unprecedented 8-division world champion. Just incredible. I mean, despite turning pro at just 4 foot 11 inches and 98 pounds, he went on to capture titles across 8 different divisions without ever losing his signature speed or power. He completely defied all the physical and biological expectations anyone would have had based on his initial body build. But, as we'll see, it's his mental build that is arguably even more fascinating. Section 4. The mind of a champion. Let's look inside that mental build. Okay, here is a genuinely shocking fact for any sports psychologist watching this. Manny Pacquiao achieved his global historical dominance without ever receiving formal sports psychology support services. Zero. He relied entirely on his own, intuitively developed mindset. When researchers finally sat down and interviewed him, they identified 4 distinct themes to his psychology. First, a purpose beyond self. His motivation evolved from just getting his family enough food to survive to eventually carrying the honor of his entire country on his shoulders. Second is faith and fate. Third is absolute determination. He literally believed that if you only give 99.9%, you shouldn't box. He demanded 110%. And finally, a distinct intelligence. Let's look a little closer at that second point, faith in fate. Pacquiao lived by this core principle. It is for man to labor, but it is God who grants benevolence. So what does that mean in practice? It means he combines that 110% absolute physical determination in training with a total complete surrender to God's will regarding the actual outcome of the fight. By doing the grueling physical work, but relinquishing control of the final result to a higher power, he virtually eliminated all of his pre-fight anxiety. It's a brilliant psychological mechanism. And this brilliantly illustrates his 4th psychological pillar, talanoa, which translates to boxing intelligence. Pacquiao makes this fascinating distinction. He says, look, in academic intelligence, if you don't know an answer on a written test, you have the luxury of time. You can sit there, think, and figure it out. But boxing intelligence? That requires making the exact right strategic choice in a split second, entirely on instinct, while in constant motion, and while another highly trained athlete is actively trying to take your head off. It's a completely distinct, high-level form of intelligence that is built through just endless, grueling repetition. Section 5. Redefining sports psychology. So the Philippine model really heavily challenges our traditional Western-centric playbook. Usually, Western sports psychology focuses strictly on intrinsic motives, doing it for yourself and maintaining an internal locus of control where you believe you alone dictate the outcome. But for athletes like Pacquiao, their psychological strength is actually drawn from an external focus. He isn't fighting for self-actualization, he's fighting for his family, his community, and for his God. It's a completely different motivational engine that powers him through those brutal late rounds. There's a really common psychological theory called learned helplessness, which basically suggests that extreme poverty and a lack of control will eventually make people just give up. But the reality for these boxers is the exact opposite. Extreme early adversity didn't breed helplessness at all. Instead, it nurtured these unyielding character strengths and a fierce hope that traditional psychology programs might completely fail to capture or honestly even know how to teach. And how do they sustain this success once they make it? By staying grounded. They're guided by a famous Filipino proverb: the person who does not look back to where he came from will not reach his destination. This acts as a cultural safety net against arrogant behavior. It literally forces the athlete to stay connected to their humble beginnings and the very community that supported them. In fact, if a sports psychologist tries to build an athlete's ego too much using Western methods, it can actually backfire and alienate them from this crucial cultural grounding. So let's leave off with a bit of a provocative thought today. If Manny Pacquiao, quite literally one of the greatest boxers in human history, reached the absolute pinnacle of his sport without traditional sports psychology, do we need to rewrite the playbook to include culture and spirituality? The Philippine model pretty clearly proves that to truly unlock human performance, we've got to look much deeper into the culture, the spirituality, and the unique realities of the athletes themselves. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive today, and hey, keep questioning the playbook.